Sorry about that. My internet dropped. So let's continue. This is why we must never determine who understands sacred law merely by observing who quotes it most confidently. We must examine the nature expressed. One person may possess fewer religious credentials, but bring forth restoration. Another may possess extensive knowledge of sacred text, but use that knowledge to accuse, silence, control, and destroy. The fruit reveals the governing consciousness. The true interpreter of the law is revealed by the life their interpretation produces. Next, saving life versus preserving control. Why would anyone oppose the restoration of a withered hand? Because a restored person can act. A restored person can create. A restored person can question. A restored person can build. A restored person can participate. A restored person is no longer dependent in the same way. The man with the withered hand could be managed. The man with the restored hand possesses agency. This is why systems sometimes resist the very restoration they claim to desire. They may say they want women empowered, but only within boundaries that preserve male control. They may say they want people spiritually mature, but discourage independent discernment. They may say they want healing, but become uncomfortable when healing produces boundaries. They may say they want people to find their voice, but only if that voice repeats the authorized conclusion. They may say they want growth, but resist every expression of growth that changes the existing hierarchy. Some systems do not oppose life in theory. They oppose the freedom that living people begin to exercise. Jesus' question exposes this contradiction. Are we trying to save life? Or are we trying to preserve an arrangement that depends upon another person's withering? Do we want the person restored or merely manageable? Do we want them awakened or obedient to our conclusions? Do we want their hand healed or useful only when serving what we have built? The question every interpretation must answer. Jesus gives us a law of discernment that reaches far beyond this synagogue. Does this interpretation do good or evil? Does it save life or destroy it? When scripture is used to teach women they cannot teach, lead, question, or operate in authority, examine the fruit. Does the interpretation nourish the gifts placed within them or cause those gifts to wither? Does it awaken their identity as bearers of the divine image, or construct an identity of permanent inferiority? Does it produce mutuality, wisdom, dignity, and love, or fear, silence, resentment, dependency, and control? When scripture is used within parenting, examine the fruit. Does it guide the child toward wisdom and self-government, or destroy their sense of safety and worth? When scripture is used within marriage, examine the fruit. Does it cultivate love, honor, responsibility, and mutual care, or provide religious protection for domination? When scripture is used in community, examine the fruit. Does it create people capable of discernment, or people afraid to think without permission? The fact that an interpretation contains biblical vocabulary does not prove that it expresses the nature of the source. The law must be recognized by its fruit: good, life, restoration, and purposeful wholeness. While Jesus asked the question, the man is standing in the midst. That matters. Jesus does not allow them to answer while ignoring the human being affected by their theology. The man's presence exposes the consequences of their interpretation. If they say healing must wait, they are saying it while looking at the hand that must remain withered. If they defend inactivity, they must do so while facing a human capacity their inactivity refuses to restore. If they insist that their position preserves the Sabbath, they must explain how Sabbath is preserved by leaving part of the living temple disconnected from purpose. The man has become the evidence. Jesus places the fruit of the interpretation in the center before asking whether the interpretation is lawful. This is a powerful pattern for us. Whenever laws, doctrines, customs, or social expectations are being debated, bring the people affected by them into the midst. Listen to the women who were silenced. Listen to the people whose questions were punished. Listen to those who were told that suffering was submission. Listen to those whose gifts were buried beneath someone else's interpretation. Listen to the people who remained in harmful environments because religious authority told them that living was rebellion. Do not discuss the law while hiding the withered hand. Do not protect the interpretation by making its human consequences invisible. If we must remove the affected person from the center in order to make our interpretation appear righteous, our interpretation cannot withstand the question Jesus is asking. The two conditions in the synagogue. The man's hand is withered, but the leader's interpretation is also withered. His hand has lost the nourishment required for movement. Their understanding has lost the nourishment required for compassion. The man, however, has responded to truth. He rises, he stands, he becomes visible. His condition is ready to change because his self-concept is willing to move with the word. The leaders remain fixed. They are physically capable of movement, but their understanding refuses to stretch. They possess hands, yet their hands are preparing accusation. They possess minds, yet their minds are closed to revelation. They possess knowledge, yet their knowledge is disconnected from life. The man has a withered hand, but a teachable consciousness. The leaders have functioning hands, but a withered interpretation. Which condition is closer to restoration? The one that recognizes its need and responds to truth. Verse 10. And looking round about them all, he said unto the man, stretch forth thy hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored whole as the other. The man has risen. He has stood forth. He now occupies the midst. His consciousness has changed position, but his hand is still withered. Then truth speaks again. Stretch forth thy hand. Jesus commands the man to do the very thing his condition appears to make impossible. He does not say, wait until your hand feels stronger. Wait until the religious leaders approve. Wait until no one is watching. Wait until your fear disappears. Wait until the environment becomes supportive. Wait until the hand restores itself and then stretch it forth. He says, stretch forth thy hand. The man is invited to act from the identity into which he has risen, rather than from the condition that has defined him. The hand says, I cannot move. Truth says, stretch. The condition presents one conclusion. Awakened consciousness receives another word, and the man must decide which voice will govern his expression. The command does not agree with the visible condition. It agrees with the purpose concealed beneath it. The hand was created to move, designed to express. The hand possessed a purpose before it became withered. Jesus does not speak to the withering as though it were the man's permanent identity. He speaks to the original capacity still present beneath the deprivation. Before speaking to the man, Jesus looks around at everyone. Luke does not say that Jesus looked only at the man. He looked upon them all. The watchers had gathered to observe him. Now he observes them. They were watching his actions. He perceives their intentions. They were looking for evidence against him. He brings their own consciousness into the light. They watch truth to accuse it. Truth looked upon them to reveal them. Mark adds an important detail. In Mark 3, verse 5, he says, "And when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their heart." His anger is connected to grief. This is not uncontrolled rage. It is the response of love, encountering a consciousness that would rather preserve restriction than rejoice in restoration. Jesus is grieved because their hearts have become hardened. They can see the man standing before them. They can see his withered hand. They understand the question Jesus has asked. Yet, they refuse to allow compassion to stretch their interpretation. The man's hand is withered. Their hearts are hardened. His condition prevents physical expression. Their condition prevents compassionate understanding. The man cannot stretch his hand, but the religious leaders will not stretch their hearts. There is a profound difference between cannot and will not. The man responds when truth speaks. The leaders resist, even when truth places the evidence before them. His visible limitation is ready to be restored. Their hidden certainty refuses to acknowledge that it needs restoration. Jesus looks around upon them all because the healing is not only a private act for the man, it is a public revelation for the entire synagogue. Everyone must witness what true Sabbath produces. Everyone must see what the law looks like when interpreted through life. Everyone must confront the difference between an understanding that restores and one that leaves human capacity with it. Next, he said unto the man, Jesus turns from the religious authorities and speaks directly to the man. He does not ask the scribes to authorize the restoration. He does not ask the Pharisees to interpret whether the man may act. He does not allow those who benefited from the man's restriction to determine whether he is permitted to become whole. Truth addresses the person whose agency has withered. Stretch forth thy hand. This is essential. The man must participate in his restoration. Jesus does not stretch the hand for him. He speaks the word, but the man responds. Truth awakens. Truth instructs. Truth reveals what is possible, but the man must embody what he has heard. Truth does not replace human agency. Truth restores it. This is the opposite of control. Control says, I will act for you. I will think for you. I will decide what you are permitted to do. You must remain dependent upon my authority. Truth says, rise, stand, stretch forth what belongs to you. Jesus does not create deeper dependency. He restores participation. He does not make the man a permanent spectator of divine power. He calls the man's own hand into movement. The evidence of restoration is not that the man remains dependent upon Jesus to move his hand. The evidence is that he can now stretch it forth himself. Next, stretch. To stretch is to move beyond the position in which something has become fixed. It is to extend, to reach, to expand, to bring into use, to test the boundary created by limitation. The hand may have remained contracted for years. The man may have adapted his entire life around what he believed it could no longer do. He may have learned to hide it, protect it, excuse it, compensate for it, define himself through it. Then truth says, stretch. This is not merely movement. It is expansion beyond an inherited limitation. It is consciousness refusing to remain contracted around an old conclusion. To stretch the hand is to reach beyond, I have never done this before. People like me are not permitted to do this. My voice does not matter. My gift is not welcome. I do not possess authority. I must remain where others placed me. I cannot become anything beyond what happened to me. Stretching does not deny that withering occurred. It refuses to let the withering define the boundary of future expression. To stretch is to allow restored identity to carry you beyond the limit established by deprivation. Next, fourth, Jesus does not merely say, move your hand privately. He says, stretch it forth. Bring it forward. Bring it outward. Let what has been restored within become visible. The hand had perhaps been held close to the body, concealed because of shame, weakness, or vulnerability. Now it must come forth. This is expression. This is manifestation. This is inward capacity becoming outward participation. The man has already stood forth. Now the hand must follow. First, the self-concept came forth. Then the expression came forth. What awakened in consciousness must now become visible through action. A person may remember inwardly that they possess wisdom, but eventually, wisdom must speak. A woman recognizes inwardly that she has authority, but eventually, authority must become embodied through teaching, leadership, creation, decision, and action. A person may understand inwardly that they deserve dignity, but eventually, that dignity must become visible through boundaries. Someone recognize their gift, but eventually, the gift must be used. Someone may understand truth, But eventually, truth must become lived. Awakening that never reaches expression leaves the hand folded within the temple. Jesus does not merely awaken the man so that he can possess a new private belief about himself. He commands that awakened identity to become visible. Stretch it forth. Next, thy hand. Jesus says, thy hand, your capacity, your gift, your agency, your expression, your responsibility. He does not tell the man to borrow another person's hand. He does not tell him to imitate someone else's expression. He calls forth what already belongs to him. This is powerful because deprivation often causes people to distract what has been placed within them. They may spend their lives admiring other people's hands. They say, their voice is stronger than mine. Their gift is more important. Their understanding is deeper. Their work is worthy of visibility. Their authority is legitimate. Their purpose deserves room. But truth says, stretch forth thy hand. Not the hand you wish you possessed. Not the hand society rewards most easily. Not the expression that makes other people comfortable. Not a copy of someone else's calling. Your hand. Restoration does not erase individuality. It releases it from restriction. The goal is not for every person to express life identically. The goal is for every part of the living body to function according to its purpose. Paul uses this same language when speaking of the body. In 1 Corinthians 12, verse 17, he says, if the whole body were an eye, where were the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where were the smelling? The hand does not need to become the eye. It needs to become a living hand. The woman does not need to imitate male expressions of power to prove she possesses authority. She must stretch forth her own hand, her wisdom, her voice, her discernment, her way of leading, her way of building, her way of nurturing life while operating in strength. Equality does not require sameness. It requires freedom for every capacity to fulfill its purpose without enforced withering. The command appears impossible. Jesus tells the man to do what he apparently cannot do. That is the paradox. If he could already stretch forth his hand, why would he need restoration? Yet the restoration occurs through his response to the instruction. Jesus does not ask the man to pretend that the hand was never withered. He invites him to stop allowing the history of the hand to determine its present possibility. The visible evidence says the hand is withered. Truth speaks to a deeper reality. The hand still possesses purpose. The man could have reasoned. Jesus must not understand my condition. I have tried before. This hand does not move. Everyone can see that it is withered. I will embarrass myself. Why ask me to do what I cannot do? But he does not debate the word. He acts. The command awakens a possibility that the condition had taught him to dismiss. This does not mean people should deny physical realities or blame themselves for conditions beyond their control. The symbolic revelation is about identity and expression. There are moments when fear says, I cannot speak. Yet truth says, speak. Shame says, remain hidden. Truth says, stand forth. Inherited interpretation says, you have no authority. Truth says, stretch forth your hand. The action may initially feel impossible because the person has practiced restriction longer than expression. But every restored capacity must eventually cross the threshold between inward recognition and embodied action. The first stretch is often the moment awakened identity refuses to seek permission from the old condition. Next, and he did so. This may be one of the most powerful phrases in the entire account. And he did so. No long argument. No delay. No negotiation with the watchers. No request for their approval. No attempt to determine whether everyone in the synagogue will understand. Truth speaks. The man responds. And he did so is embodiment. He does not merely agree with Jesus. He does not say, I believe stretching is possible. He stretches. He does not convert the word into a doctrine. He becomes its evidence. The word becomes living when the hearer becomes its expression. This is the movement from belief to embodiment. He could have believed that Jesus had authority and still kept his hand folded. He could have admired the teaching and remained motionless. He could have felt inspired by Rise Up without ever standing. He could have agreed that saving life was lawful without extending his own hand. But the text says, and he did so. His obedience is not passive submission to external control. It is active alignment with the truth that restores his own agency. That distinction matters. Control commands actions that increase dependence upon the controller. Truth calls forth actions that restore the person's capacity to live, discern, participate, and express. He obeys the word, and the fruit of that obedience is greater agency. This gives us another discernment key. We should examine what a teaching's definition of obedience produces. Does obedience make the person increasingly fearful, silent, dependent, and unable to trust discernment? Or does it awaken responsibility? wisdom, love, self-government, and purposeful participation. Jesus' command does not diminish the man, it restores him. The man stretches forth his hand in front of the very people who were prepared to accuse Jesus for restoring it. This is extraordinary. His restoration does not occur in a private room where opposition cannot see him. He acts in the midst, under observation, within the environment where his reading had been tolerated. The watchers remain. The religious resistance remains. The threat of accusation remains. But the man stretches anyway. The environment does not have to change before the awakened person begins to act differently within it. The leaders have not apologized. They have not reconsidered their interpretation. They have not announced that the man is free. They have not given him permission. His agency is restored before the system acknowledges that it was never restricted. This speaks directly to women. A woman may awaken to her authority before the religious institution changes its doctrine. She may begin teaching before everyone approves. She may lead while some still call her rebellious. She may establish boundaries while others accuse her of failing to submit. She may build her vision while the system continues debating whether she should possess one. She may stretch forth her hand while the watchers are still gathering evidence. You do not have to wait for the consciousness that accepted your withering to understand your restoration. The man receives his instruction from truth, not from the watchers. And because he knows the voice that called him to rise, he can withstand the eyes that would prefer him to remain seated. His hand was restored. The verse does not say Jesus gave him a new hand. It says his hand was restored. Restoration means something originally belonging to the man returned to living function. The capacity was not foreign. The purpose was not newly invented. The hand was his before it withered. The restoration returned it to what it was designed to express. This distinction is essential. Truth does not manufacture the man's authority. Truth reconnects his existing capacity to life. Truth does not make women intelligent. Truth exposes the lie that their intelligence should remain subordinate. Truth does not give women a voice. Truth confronts the systems that taught them to silence it. Truth does not invent their leadership. Truth nourishes what restriction caused to wither. The restoration of agency is not the creation of a new identity. It is the recovery of what false identity prevented from living. This is remembrance. The man rises because he remembers who he is beyond the condition. The hand stretches because expression begins to agree with that remembered identity. Then what had withered is restored. The movement is beautiful. Remember, rise, stand, stretch, restore. Restoration occurs in the stretching. Notice the sequence. And he did so, and his hand was restored. The text presents the stretching and the restoration together. He does not wait to observe restoration before responding. He responds, and restoration becomes visible through that response. The hand is restored as it moves into its intended purpose. What if some capacities recover strength through being exercised? A voice weakened by years of silence may become stronger through speaking. Discernment weakened by dependency may become clearer through being practiced. Confidence weakened by rejection may go through purposeful action. Creativity bred by criticism may revive through creating again. Leadership denied by restrictive systems may develop through accepting responsibility. Boundaries weakened by fear may strengthen through being established and maintained. The person may say, I will act when I feel completely restored. But this verse reveals another possibility. Restoration may meet you in the act of stretching. This does not mean we act recklessly or force ourselves beyond healthy limitations. It means that agency cannot always be restored through contemplation alone. At some point, the hand must move, the voice must speak, the gift must be used, the boundary must be expressed, the work must begin, the teaching must be shared. The awakened identity must enter visible participation. The strength needed for expression is often discovered within the act of expression. Next, whole. His hand was restored whole. Wholeness is not merely improvement, it is integration. The hand is reconnected to purpose. What is within the man can now move outward through expression. His identity, authority, capacity, and action are no longer divided. Before restoration, capacity existed, but expression was restricted. Purpose existed, but agency could not embody it. Life was present, but part of the instrument had withered. After restoration, the inward life can flow through the outward hand. That is wholeness. Wholeness is removal of the division between what we carry within and what we are free to express. A person may possess love within, but be too afraid to communicate it. Wisdom within, but be forbidden to teach. Vision within, but be afraid to build. Truth within, but lack the confidence to speak. Purpose within, but remain trapped in identity of powerlessness. The hand restored whole represents the reunion of inward capacity and outward expression. Nothing essential is missing. What was disconnected has been rejoined to the flow of life. Next, as the other. Luke ends with a beautiful detail. His hand was restored, whole as the other. The withered hand becomes as the other. The part previously marked by weakness is no longer treated as permanently inferior. Balance returns. Harmony returns. Equal function returns. The right hand is no longer defined in comparison with the healthy hand as deficient, defective, or incapable. It is restored to equal participation. This is deeply significant in the experience of women. For generations, the capacities of women were often treated as permanently lesser, less rational, less authoritative, less capable of leadership, less qualified to interpret, less suited to govern, less entitled to public expression. But the restored hand becomes whole as the other, not above the other, not beneath the other, whole as the other. Restoration does not reverse domination. It ends the condition of imposed inferiority. The purpose is not for the previously restricted hand to wither the other hand in return. The purpose is wholeness within the body, both hands functioning, both participating, both serving life, both expressing the intelligence of the same living temple. This mirrors Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 14. For the body is not one member, but many. The body does not become whole by empowering one member to suppress another. Wholeness appears when every member can function according to purpose. A body with one hand, deliberately restricted, cannot call itself complete merely because the other hand functions well. A church cannot call itself whole while women's discernment is silenced. A society cannot call itself whole while women's leadership is treated as threatening. A marriage cannot call itself whole while one person's agency must diminish for the other person to feel powerful. A community cannot call itself whole while some members are permitted to serve but forbidden to shape its direction. The restoration of the hand is the restoration of the body. The right hand restored, because it's specifically the right hand. The restoration invites more than general ability. The right side represents authority, strength, conscious action, and power. The man's authority of expression is restored. He does not merely feel better inwardly. He recovers the capacity to participate actively in life. This is why systems built upon dependency may fear restoration. A restored hand can work, create, write, build, teach, hold, give, receive, protect, direct, vote, sign, own, and lead. The restored person is no longer merely present. They are capable of acting. The hand is where remembered identity becomes exercised authority. This is what has happened in the sequence. Rise up, restored awareness. Stand forth, restored position. In the midst, restored significance. Stretch forth, restored expression. His hand was restored, revealed renewed agency. Whole as the other, restored equality and balance. the entire human being is being returned to alignment. Jesus does not touch the man. In this account, Jesus does not appear to touch the withered hand. He speaks. The man responds. This is powerful symbolically. Truth does not need to manipulate the person from the outside. It awakens a response from within. The life capable of restoring expression is already present in the living temple. The word brings that capacity into conscious agreement with its purpose. Jesus does not seize the hand and pull it outward. He preserves the man's participation. Restoration is not something merely done to him. It is something awakened through him. This is how liberating teaching functions. It does not say, you are powerless, and I alone possess what you need. It says, rise, stand, stretch forth what is already yours. A true teacher does not create permanent dependency upon their presence. A true teacher helps the hearer recognize and embody the life already dwelling within the temple. The man becomes the interpretation. The religious leaders entered the scene with their interpretation of Sabbath. Jesus did not merely offer a competing argument. He restored the man. The whole hand becomes the interpretation. The fruit settles the question. What is Sabbath? Look at the hand. What is lawful? Look at the restoration. What does good produce? Look at the man who can now express what was previously restricted. What does saving life mean? Look at the capacity returned to purpose. The restored human being becomes the evidence that Jesus understood the law. This is crucial for our teaching. The strongest evidence of truth is not the confidence with which it is argued. It is the life it restores. If a symbolic reading helps people recognize harmful patterns, recover dignity, awaken discernment, embody compassion, establish healthy boundaries, and express the nature of the source, that fruit deserves observation. If an interpretation repeatedly produces fear, inferiority, silencing, dependency, accusation, and control, its sacred vocabulary cannot exempt it from examination. The hand reveals the law because the fruit reveals the nature. A message to every withered expression. This verse speaks to anyone who has been taught to distrust their own capacity. To the woman told she cannot teach, stretch forth thy hand. To the person whose questions were punished, stretch forth thy discernment. To the one whose creativity was mocked, stretch forth thy gift. To the person whose voice was silenced in a controlling relationship, stretch forth thy voice. To the one who learned to disappear so others could remain comfortable, rise and stand forth in the midst. To the person who has waited for unanimous approval, the watchers do not determine whether restoration is lawful. To the one who has understood truth inwardly, but has not yet embodied it, let the hand express what consciousness has remembered. Your first attempt may feel like stretching something that has not moved in years. It may feel unfamiliar. It may expose you to observation. It may challenge the arrangement others preferred. But the command of truth is not asking you to become someone else. It is calling what already belongs to you back into life. Stretch forth thy hand. The law revealed in Luke 6 verse 10. The verse reveals a complete law of restoration. Truth awakens identity before it restores expression. The man first rises, then he stands, then he occupies the center, then he stretches, then the hand is restored. The outward change follows an inward repositioning. But inward awakening is not the final destination. It must proceed into action. Remembered identity becomes restored agency through embodied response. The man heard the word. He agreed with it through movement. The hand became whole. And the part of him that had been used as evidence of limitation became evidence of restoration. The watcher saw a withered hand and prepared an accusation. Jesus saw a living capacity waiting to be called forth. The religious system defined the man through what was not functioning. Truth addressed him according to what he was created to express. And when he acted from the word rather than the condition, his hand became whole as the other. The withered condition described his experience, but it never defined his essence. Leviticus 11 makes the pattern even clearer. Among the winged creeping things, Israel could eat those that had legs above their feet to leap withal upon the earth. Leviticus 11 verse 21. The creature touches the earth, but it possesses the capacity to rise beyond the level upon which it moves. Symbolically, the earth represents the earthly condition, the visible circumstance, material evidence, inherited limitation, or lower conclusion. The acceptable creature does not deny the earth. It simply refuses to be confined to it. It has legs, specifically designed to leap. So when Moses says to eat it, this becomes more than dietary instruction through our symbolic lens. Moses is saying, consume this pattern, internalize this quality, embody the consciousness capable of rising beyond its present level. That is exactly what the man with the withered hand does. His visible condition says, remain contracted. Truth says, stretch, expand, extend beyond the conclusion your condition taught you to accept. The leaping creature and the stretching hand reveal the same governing law. The leap expands your position. The stretch expands your capacity. Both refuse confinement to the present condition. Both reveal that contact with limitation does not require identification with limitation. And look at how beautifully the symbols complement each other. Legs represent movement. where consciousness is capable of going. Hands represent expression, what consciousness is capable of doing. Leviticus 11 sets in effect embody the mindset that can rise beyond the ground upon which it presently stands. Jesus says, extend the capacity that has been confined within its present form. So stretching is not simply trying harder. It is making room for a greater expression of what is already within you. When we stretch our understanding, it becomes larger than inherited doctrine. When we stretch our compassion, it becomes larger than personal prejudice. When we stretch our self-concept, it becomes larger than past experience. When we stretch our hand, our expression becomes larger than the limitation that once governed it. And the creature does not remain permanently suspended above the earth. It lands, but it can leap again. That may reveal something important too. Awakened consciousness does not escape ordinary life. It develops the capacity not to be imprisoned by any temporary condition within it. This is why it is edible. Its pattern can become part of us. The instruction in Leviticus 11 could be read as, do not consume the consciousness that only crawls within limitation. Consume the consciousness equipped to rise beyond it. And Jesus demonstrates that law in the synagogue. Rise up, stand forth, stretch forth. Each instruction increases the man's inner and outward space. Rise, expand beyond the former level of awareness. Stand forth, expand beyond the position of invisibility. Come into the midst. Expand beyond marginalization. Stretch forth. Expand expression beyond its withered boundary. Then restoration appears. So the deepest principle is, whatever life is nourishing, it equips to expand. Whatever is deprived of life contracts and withers. The man's hand had contracted because the flow of life into expression had been restricted. Truth restores the flow by calling him into expansion. And suddenly, eat the leaping creature and stretch forth thy hand, become parts of the same teaching. Embody the capacity to move beyond the boundaries of your present condition. Moses was teaching expansion, and Jesus was demonstrating it. Verse 11, the man is restored. His hand is whole. Life has been saved. Good has been done. The meaning of Sabbath has become visible. Surely, everyone in the synagogue will rejoice. But Luke tells us, the religious leaders were filled with madness and communed one with another what they might do to Jesus. The man is filled with restored life. The religious leaders are filled with madness. One consciousness stretches into wholeness. The other contracts into fury. The same event reveals two completely different inner conditions. The restoration of the hand does not create the anger within them, it exposes it. They were comfortable while the man remained restricted. But when his hand becomes whole, their interpretation loses control of the evidence. They can no longer claim that their understanding preserves life. The living testimony stands before them. And instead of allowing the evidence to transform their conclusion, they begin discussing what they might do to the one who revealed its error. When truth restores what a system has normalized as withered, the system must either transform or attack the evidence. A system reveals what it truly values by what disturbs its peace. If suffering can continue without troubling the system, but liberation causes outrage, then the system's peace was never rooted in love. It was the quiet produced by control. The synagogue appeared orderly, while the man remained seated with his hand concealed. But that order depended upon his restriction remaining unchallenged. Once he rises, stands in the midst, stretches forth his hand, and becomes whole, the hidden disorder within the observers becomes visible. His movement did not create their madness. It disturbed the arrangement that had kept their madness concealed. Restoration does not create resistance, it reveals it. Before the healing, the leader's opposition could appear principled. They were merely watching. They were supposedly concerned about Sabbath observance. They may have presented themselves as careful guardians of sacred law. But once the man is healed, there is no injury for them to condemn. No evil has occurred. Nothing has been taken from anyone. A human being has simply become whole. Their reaction therefore reveals that the true controversy was never merely about the Sabbath. It was about authority. Who possesses the authority to reveal what the law means? Jesus has interpreted the Sabbath by embodying its purpose. He has not asked permission from recognized authorities. He has not accepted their inherited boundaries. He has demonstrated that their interpretation leaves human capacity withered. And now, the restored man stands as evidence that another understanding produces better fruit. Their anger emerges because the healing has weakened their control over the meaning of the law. When an interpretation depends upon authority rather than truth, living evidence becomes threatening. If they accept the restoration, they must reconsider themselves. They must ask, have we protected the wording while opposing its nature? Have we called restriction holiness? Have we mistaken inactivity for rest? Have we used the Sabbath to prevent the very wholeness it signifies? Have we become so committed to being right that goodness now appears unlawful to us? The restored hand requires inward examination. But instead of allowing truth to stretch their understanding, they turn their attention toward Jesus. This is a familiar pattern. When people do not want to examine the evidence, they begin examining the person who presented it. They cannot deny that the hand is whole. So they focus on what they might do to the one who restored it. They cannot refute the fruit. So they begin planning against the teacher. They cannot make the man withered again without exposing themselves. So they seek to remove the voice that revealed the contradiction. Yes, and communed one with another. Their madness moves into communion. They begin speaking with one another. This reveals another law. Whatever fills consciousness eventually seeks agreement, reinforcement, and expression. They do not turn toward the restored man. They do not ask him, "What has this restoration meant for you?" They do not inquire, "What did you experience when Jesus spoke?" They did not examine the hand. They did not reconsider the law. Instead, they commune with those who share their certain position. Their conversation is not directed toward understanding. It is directed toward preserving their conclusion. This is the opposite of observe before you conclude. They have observed the miracle, but they refuse to allow the observation to transform the conclusion. They saw the evidence. They watched the sequence. They heard Jesus' question. They witnessed the man stretch. They can see that his hand is whole. But their conversation does not begin with, "What does this evidence reveal?" It begins with, "What shall we do about Jesus?" They do not gather to understand the evidence. They gather to protect themselves from what the evidence means. This is how collective resistance forms. One person's threatened certainty finds another person with the same threatened certainty. They repeat their interpretation to one another. They intensify one another's anger. They transform discomfort into accusation. They turn accusation into agreement. And agreement begins searching for action. This is why communion must be examined by its fruit. Not every gathering of religious people is communion with truth. People can commune around fear, around resentment, around superiority, around the need to silence questions, around preserving power, around a shared refusal to reconsider. Agreement is not evidence of truth. People can become united around resistance to truth. Notice who appears to be absent from their conversation. The man whose hand was restored. They speak with one another about Jesus, but there is no indication that they consult the person who received life. This is exactly how systems protect harmful interpretations. They speak about the affected people without listening to them. They discuss whether women should teach without listening to the wisdom women are already bringing forth. They debate whether someone should establish boundaries without listening to what the absence of boundaries has caused them. They discuss whether a tradition is harmful while excluding those whose capacities withered beneath it. They decide what restoration should look like without centering the restored person. The moment the living testimony is excluded from the conversation, inherited authority can begin rearranging the evidence around itself. But the man's whole hand remains. Whether they include him or not, the evidence exists. Whether they approve or not, restoration has happened. Whether they reinterpret the event or not, the hand can move. That is the power of embodiment. An argument can be dismissed. A conclusion can be debated. But when the person who was once silent begins to speak with wisdom, something has changed. When the person who was dependent begins exercising discernment, something has changed. When the woman who was told she possessed no authority begins producing life through her teaching, something has changed. The restored hand becomes difficult to deny. Embodied fruit continues testifying even when those trained by it refuse to include it in their conversation. Next, what they might do. They do not ask what they might learn. They ask what they might do. But their intended action is not directed toward restoring anyone. The man has acted in response to truth. Now the leaders prepare to act in response to madness. The contrast is striking. Jesus said to the man, "Stretch forth thy hand." The man did so, and his hand was restored. Then, the religious leaders communed with one another concerning what they might do to Jesus. Both the man and the leaders move from inward condition toward outward action. The man is filled with the word of restoration, and his action produces wholeness. The leaders are filled with madness, and their contemplated action moves toward destruction. What fills consciousness determines what the hand eventually seeks to perform. The man's restored hand is now available for purposeful expression. Their functioning hands are available to carry out the intention formed within a resistant consciousness. This teaches us that the problem is not the hand itself. The hand expresses its governing mind. A restored capacity must still be directed by a life-giving consciousness. Power without love can destroy. Authority without wisdom can oppress. Knowledge without humility can accuse. Religious influence without compassion can preserve withering while calling itself holy. The law is not merely about possessing the ability to act. It is about the nature governing the action. The man's hand had lacked ability, but his consciousness responded to life. The leaders possess ability, but their consciousness is considering harm. Jesus restores more than outward action. He reveals the kind of inward government under which action becomes lawful. Jesus has not harmed them. He has not taken anything that rightfully belongs to them. He has not attacked them physically. He has not prevented them from worshiping. He has restored another human being. Yet, they begin considering what they might do to him. Why does another person's restoration feel like an attack? Because when identity is built upon control, another person's freedom can feel like personal loss. When authority depends upon others remaining dependent, restored agency feels threatening. When certainty depends upon never being questioned, evidence feels disrespectful. When a hierarchy depends upon one group remaining beneath another, equality feels like disorder. Those who confuse privilege with divine order may experience restoration as persecution. Jesus has done nothing to them, but what he has done for the man exposes what their interpretation failed to do. His restoration reveals their barrenness. His compassion reveals their hardness. His understanding reveals the limits of their tradition. His freedom reveals their bondage to reputation and control. They do not know what to do with the revelation, so they begin asking what to do with Jesus. When truth cannot be controlled, resistant consciousness attempts to control the one expressing it. This pattern appears repeatedly. Question the messenger, attack their character, call their discernment rebellion, accuse their freedom of being disorder, isolate them, discredit them, silence them, remove them from the community, warn others not to listen, preserve the system by portraying restoration as danger. But none of this changes the hand. The hand is whole. Why wholeness can threaten a system? The man's restoration changes more than his private experience. A withered hand was manageable. A restored hand can participate. It can build. It can write. It can work. It can create. It can give. It can receive. It can point. It can sign. It can lead. It can challenge. It can reach beyond the place assigned to it. This is why expansion can provoke resistance. When the man stretches forth his hand, he does not merely regain movement. He becomes less governable by the identity of deficiency. The system can no longer position him through his limitation in the same way. Restored agency changes relationships because the person can no longer be controlled through the same deprivation. This applies inwardly as well. When discernment is restored, fear can no longer govern us as easily. When self-worth is restored, manipulation loses some of its power. When our voice is restored, silence can no longer be presented as our natural condition. When identity is restored, inherited labels lose authority. When we remember that the kingdom is within, systems built upon permanent spiritual dependency becomes less persuasive. This does not mean the restored person becomes hostile or rebellious. It means they become capable of conscious participation. And systems accustomed to compliance may call conscious participation rebellion. Expansion is threatening only to structures that require contraction. Leviticus 11:21 says, "It's the creature that can live with all upon the earth." It touches the earth, but is not confined to one level of movement. Its pattern is edible because it embodies the capacity to rise beyond its present ground. The man in Luke 6 embodies the same law. He has lived upon the ground of limitation. His hand has remained contracted within a visible condition. But when truth speaks, he stretches. He expands. He moves beyond the boundary his former experience appeared to establish. The religious leaders, however, embody the opposite pattern. They cannot leap beyond inherited interpretation. They cannot stretch beyond the conclusion with which they entered the synagogue. They crawl within the limits of accusation. They remain confined to a single plane of perception. Jesus acts on the Sabbath, therefore he must be condemned. They cannot rise high enough to observe the whole pattern. A human being has been restored. Good has been done. Life has been saved. The purpose of Sabbath has become visible. The law has produced wholeness. The man's hand stretches because his consciousness can leap. Their madness appears because their interpretation cannot rise beyond its inherited ground. This is why consuming the leaping pattern matters. It is not enough to possess wings in theory. The creature must have the structure required to leap. It must embody the capacity to move beyond the earthly level. Likewise, it is not enough to claim spiritual knowledge. Our understanding must possess the flexibility to rise when new evidence reveals a larger pattern. A living interpretation can stretch. A withered interpretation must attack whatever exceeds its boundary. Expansion reveals what was restricting us. Stretching does not only reveal the man's capacity, it reveals the force that had accepted his contraction. As long as the hand remains folded, no one knows how the environment will respond to its expansion. But when it stretches forth, every hidden attitude becomes visible. Some may celebrate. Some may become uncomfortable. Some may attempt to return the person to their former position. Some may question whether the expansion is lawful. Some may call it pride. Some may search for evidence against it. This is why stepping into restored agency often reveals the nature of our relationships. As long as you remain silent, people may call you peaceful. When you speak honestly, you discover whether they valued your peace or your silence. As long as you lack boundaries, people may call you loving. When you establish boundaries, you discover whether they valued your love or your availability for exploitation. As long as you hide your wisdom, people may call you humble. When you teach, you discover whether they valued humility or your invisibility. As long as you follow inherited conclusions, people may call you faithful. When you begin observing for yourself, you discover whether they valued faith or unquestioning agreement. Your expansion does not change everyone around you. Sometimes, it reveals what required you to remain in order to stay comfortable. The man's restored hand reveals that the leaders were more comfortable with his limitation than with the loss of their interpretive control. Their madness is not presented as lack of information. They have all the evidence they need. They watch the healing happen. Their condition is the refusal to allow evidence to enlarge understanding. This gives us a powerful definition of irrationality. Madness is not merely believing something incorrect. It is defending a conclusion after its fruit has contradicted the nature we claim to represent. They claim to represent the source, yet oppose restoration. They claim to honor the law, yet contemplate destruction. They claim to protect Sabbath, yet are filled with unrest. They claim to possess spiritual sight, yet cannot recognize good when it stands before them. The contradiction is now complete. And rather than resolving the contradiction by examining their interpretation, they preserve it by opposing Jesus. This happens whenever identity becomes fused with being right. If changing our conclusion feels like losing ourselves, we may resist even beautiful evidence. We may witness healing and search for a violation. We may encounter wisdom and search for a reason to disqualify the speaker. We may observe good fruit and attack the person who produced it. We may protect the framework because we no longer know who we are without it. When a conclusion becomes an identity, evidence feels like an essential threat. But Jesus models another way. He asks questions. He observes fruit. He returns the law to its governing nature. He allows restoration to reveal the meaning. This is discernment. The leaders face a difficult problem. The healing occurred publicly. The man stood in the midst. Everyone saw the withered hand. Everyone heard the command. Everyone witnessed him stretch it forth. Everyone can now see that it is whole. The evidence cannot be easily erased. So the resistance must change strategy. It moves from questioning the event to targeting the person. This is why mature discernment must pay attention when conversations shift from fruit to personality. If someone asks, does this teaching restore dignity? Does it awaken compassion? Does it produce wisdom? Does it help people recognize harmful patterns? Does it return agency to the person? Those questions examine fruit. But if the response becomes, who gave her authority? Why does she think she can teach? She is too independent. She is leading people astray because she questions tradition. She does not possess the credentials to recognize. Then the focus has moved. The restored hand is no longer being examined. The person through whom restoration came is being placed on trial. When fruit cannot be denied, threatened authority often attempts to disqualify the vessel. But truth does not become false because the authorized interpreters reject its messenger. The hand remains whole. Luke places two forms of fullness before us. The man's hand is restored to wholeness. The leaders are filled with madness. One is filled by returning to purpose. The other is filled by resisting purpose. One fullness expands human capacity. The other fullness consumes sound judgment. One brings the person into alignment. The other drives people toward conspiracy. This teaches us to examine not only whether we feel full, passionate, certain, or spiritually energized. We must ask, full of what? Religious intensity is not automatically divine life. Confidence is not automatically wisdom. Passion is not automatically truth. Unity is not automatically righteousness. Zeal can be filled with accusation. Agreement can be organized around fear. Certainty can conceal a refusal to observe. The nature of fullness is revealed by what it produces toward life. Does it restore? Does it expand compassion? Does it increase wisdom? Does it preserve dignity? Does it awaken responsible agency? Does it lead toward truth, mercy, and wholeness? Or does it produce rage when another person becomes free? The inner scribes and Pharisees. Read inwardly, the scribes and Pharisees also represent the established reasoning within us that watches every new movement of truth through the lens of old conclusions. There may be a part of us that has become accustomed to the withered condition. We know how to survive while silent. We know how to function while hidden. We know how to remain accepted by limiting our expression. We know the rules of the familiar arrangement. Then truth says, rise, stand forth, stretch forth thy hand. One part of us responds. Another part becomes afraid. It begins communing with every inherited voice. What will people say? Who do you think you are? What if you are wrong? What if they reject you? Women are not supposed to do this. You have never done this before. Remain where it is safe. Keep the hand concealed. These voices gather like an inward council, discussing what they might do to the revelation that is challenging the former identity. The inner Pharisee is the rigid conclusion that would rather silence an expanding truth than reconsider the limitation it has called lawful. We do not overcome this voice by hating ourselves. We observe it. We examine its fruit. Does it save life or does it preserve withering? Does it produce wise caution or permanent contraction? Does it protect us from genuine harm or protect an old identity from transformation? Discernment does not mean recklessness, but neither does it allow fear to rename contraction as faithfulness. What happens when you stretch? This verse prepares us for a reality of restoration. Not everyone who witnessed your withering will celebrate your expansion. Some people knew how to relate to you when you were uncertain. Your confidence may disturb them. Some people praised your humility when it meant never disagreeing. Your discernment may now be called pride. Some people welcomed your service as long as you never exercised leadership. Your authority may now be called rebellion. Some people loved your generosity while it had no boundaries. Your self-respect may now be called selfishness. Some people accepted your symbolic reading while they believed it was merely personal reflection. When that reading begins revealing patterns that challenge inherited systems, they may start looking for accusations. But their response does not determine whether the hand is whole. Resistance is not evidence that expansion is wrong. Sometimes it is evidence that expansion has reached the boundary of an arrangement built upon your contraction. The question remains the one Jesus already asked. Does it do good? Does it save life? What fruit does it produce? This protects us from two extremes. We do not assume every controversial action is righteousness merely because others resist it. But neither do we assume opposition proves wrongdoing. We examine the nature and fruit. Jesus' action produces restoration. Their opposition produces destructive consultation. The fruit reveals the difference. Luke 6:11 reveals a sobering law. When truth restores what a system has normalized as withered, the system must either expand its understanding or resist the restoration. There is no comfortable middle ground. The whole hand changes the evidence. The leaders can no longer maintain their interpretation without confronting the living person standing before them. They must stretch or become angry at the stretch. They must rise beyond inherited reasoning or attack the one who has risen. They must allow compassion to enlarge the law or use the law to defend their contraction. The man embodies the leaping consciousness. He rises from his former position. He stretches beyond his former capacity. The leaders embody the consciousness that remains earthbound within one conclusion. And because they cannot rise with the elevation, they begin planning against it. Whatever refuses to expand with truth eventually experiences truth expansion as a threat. This verse reveals that restoration is also revelation. The healing reveals the man's true capacity, but it also reveals the consciousness of everyone observing him. The man's restored hand becomes a mirror. Those governed by life see a reason to rejoice. Those governed by control see a reason to retaliate. The same event exposes what fills each vessel. Truth does not merely change the one who receives it. It reveals everyone's relationship to the change. Luke 6:11 therefore asks us, what happens within us when another person stretches? Do we rejoice when women recover their voices? Do we celebrate when people begin exercising discernment? Can we honor someone's growth when it means they no longer depend upon us? Can our interpretation stretch when its fruit is shown to have caused withering? Can we receive evidence that requires us to revise a conclusion? Can we allow restoration to teach us? Or do we begin communing with every voice that helps us preserve what we have always believed? The man's hand was restored because he allowed truth to expand his expression. The leaders were filled with madness because they would not allow truth to expand their understanding. The hand that appeared incapable of stretching became whole. The minds that believed themselves whole refused to stretch at all. The verse is not merely showing us angry religious leaders. It is revealing the consequence of resisting expansion. Life stretches. Truth enlarges. Wisdom grows. Compassion makes room. Understanding rises beyond the ground of its first conclusion. But a consciousness that refuses to expand becomes increasingly irrational because it must continually oppose the living evidence standing before it. The restored hand says, life was served. Their madness says, our control was threatened. And the fruit tells us which consciousness understood the law. This is what the story about the withered hand is about. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next teaching. Have a good night.